Story Hunters, the podcast about storytellers around the world. In this episode, you are going to meet 4 women and their roots of storytelling, and why to let stories in our lives.
Why storytelling is in your life. I would be very grateful if you share it with us.
I can jump back in because as you were asking the question, I suddenly realised I knew what the answer was when I thought I didn't. And I would say for me, it's like my version of music. I like music, but I don't think that I'm very musical. And I love watching films, I love reading books, but they are not interactive. They're a very passive experience, or a very sort of, they're not alive. Whereas everybody understands playing live music, sharing live music, going to a concert, that's very mainstream. And for me, this is like my version of that. So the difference between listening to a recording of music and watching it live, that's for me the difference between reading a book and experiencing storytelling.
So what does storytelling mean, and where does it sit in my life? Is that that's my interpretation of the question. And I think for me, storytelling on a personal note has always been about meaning making. It's always been a place where I go to make sense of who I am, where I am, why I am where I am. And I'll find a story that sticks in my head. And so it's that, and it creates community. There's always this thing where you come and you say, on that day in 1989, or once upon a time, and people kind of sit up, even those people who kind of look like it's boring, as you go on, you suddenly see them leaning in or laughing really loudly. And so it's been a way of connecting and creating community, of sense making. I come out of a background as a teacher, and I facilitate leadership and processes in organizations. And I find, actually, even when I was in my A-levels, I find when I wanted to explain something and I didn't know how to explain it, sometimes I'd find a story that I could tell that would give me the language then to explain something to people in a way that now we could understand each other. So it's also been a tool for me to teach, and it's medicine. there's healing. I found, people always talk about Women Who Run with the Wolves and Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and that book mentored me for years. It sat on my bedside table, and it was a thing I dipped back into and back. I was so excited when I found it. I was like, this woman uses fairy tales to teach deep things, and why don't people know how to do that? It was so exciting. But it's also been in organization, when one works with the community and people start telling their stories, or when they start telling the story of the organization, of where it came from and how it is where it is now. There's a sense of community making and healing and connection that really happens. And I think for me, that's what story is. And yeah, when you tell them I'm coming to tell stories, and they all roll their eyes, especially when they're older people, they're like, yeah, we're big people, we don't need stories. And then you start, and then they come slowly and tell you in your ear, that was so moving. And it's worth it. It is.
I think for me as a child, I found the world a very confusing and random and meaningless place. Nothing very much made sense to me as a child. I found the behavior of adults around me quite incomprehensible. It was a bit in India like the white mischief period in Africa, I think, where they were all caught up in having affairs on their own, kind of business. And they didn't really, I think a lot of what we were being told as children about how we should behave, don't tell lies, be nice to people, was not how they were behaving. And also, I think the other thing about life that I found as a child was the repetitiveness of life, how boring it was to have to do the same things over and over again, you know? And it was like, why is it like this? So stories and books were, you know, you didn't go to the Lewin books or have to brush your teeth. You just did exciting things. So I think that was my initial attraction to it. And then my mother was a writer, and then my brother's a writer as well. And then I became a writer. One of the things, I was lonely as a child as well, very lonely. And I spent a lot of time reading on my own. And I think when I became a writer, I was, in a way, it's almost like I use writing to order my own life. I write about the issues that I'm trying to solve in my own life. And often when I get to the end of a book, I realize I've solved something that I myself have been struggling with. But writing is quite lonely because, you know, you put your book out there and you have no idea really what, I mean, you get reviews and things, but it's not the same. So I discovered storytelling quite late. And I think the thing about storytelling is exactly what Philippa was saying, which is that feeling when you're standing up in front of a room and you start telling and you just sense the listening in the room, the atmosphere, and you can see the reactions of people. And then you get the kind of reaction at the end of the story. And it's kind of instant gratification. So I found that really rewarding. And I've realized as I've got older that having been someone who had a lot of kind of walls of defense around me, I'm really hungry for connection with other people. And I think storytelling provides that better than anything else I've come across. It's such a quick way to make contact with other people, I think. And also, because stories are metaphorical, you can deal with all kinds of issues that might be threatening to people if you were directly addressing something in their own lives. But because it's told in the form of a metaphor, it allows them space to think about that without actually, you know, it feeling threatening to them, like they're being put on the spot. So, yeah, I think there's a huge richness in stories, and they don't seem to, well, some stories obviously date, or some elements of stories obviously date, like giving women away as prizes. But the basic themes of stories, I think, seem to be pretty universal and timeless.
Well, I must say that I feel really humbled by the question, and I think if you ask about storytelling in my life, what storytelling is for me, I would say that is actually the sacred room maybe that I can enter, or that pillar that keeps things together. Magic, really. I also, when I perform as a storyteller, I'm very intuitive. So I go there, I have my stories prepared, and then I stand there in front of the audience and I'm like, gosh, why on earth is this story pushing its way through and wants to be told? And I very often end up telling a completely different story than I was planning to originally. And many times I then get the answer to why I was telling that story. So somebody comes to me and says, you know, there is a girl in the class who lost her father 1 month ago, for instance. And I feel so humbled in that moment. And I've seen this story magic work time and again. For me, stories in my life are actually very beautiful connection with the magic that I'm very grateful for, and that I've used in parenting a lot and in different walks in life, but I'm so grateful for it, really.